Hello, my name's Mark Saunders and this is a short YouTube video presentation on selecting samples and provides an introduction to sampling. There'll be other YouTube videos on sampling available also on my YouTube channel, Mark Saunders on Research Methods, and you can see the link on the bottom left hand side. Please also look at the other videos and hopefully they'll be of help to you as well. In this video we're very much giving an overview of sampling, and we're going to start by looking at the terms population, sample and element, or indeed case. The next thing we're going to look at is the need for sampling, and then we're going to provide an overview of sample selection procedures, and I stress this is very much an overview and does not go into as much detail as the diagram on the right from my textbook Research Methods for Business students. Rather, what we'll be talking is looking at briefly at probability sampling, non-probability sampling, and then further reading. So let's start off by looking at populations, samples and elements. The population, represented by stars in this diagram, is the complete set of cases or elements. Once we've got our complete list of the population, if we're doing probability sampling, or we know the characteristics of our population, we're doing non-probability sampling, we can think about our target population. This is the complete set that is the actual focus of the research, and so it's much more manageable. As you can see, it's a smaller size. And then the sample we select is a subgroup of that population, or indeed also the target population. Let's now look at the need for sampling. Often it's impracticable to collect data from the entire population. This may be due to the large size of the population, perhaps all the people living in a country, or all the employees of a firm being too large to collect data from everybody. Indeed, if we look at countries, they very, very rarely collect data from all their population due to its large size, perhaps having a census every 10 years. Alternatively, it might be that the entire population is inaccessible, perhaps due to their remoteness if you wanted to interview them, or alternatively inaccessible because they're difficult to reach. So it may be a population such as perhaps people who are drug abusers, not easy to find them and to collect data from them. Another reason for sampling is collecting data may destroy the sample element or the case. For example, if we're crash testing cars and to collect our data and we crash the car, then we haven't got the car to sell. So obviously we need to only use a sample. Similarly, we have budget constraints in our collection of our data, in that we only have so much money and we may have bought our list of people to send a questionnaire to and we can only afford to send so many. And then indeed there is a cost of processing data and so on. And finally, there are time constraints. Most research projects have to be done within a certain time, and it would be impossible to collect data from everybody because it would take too long. Hence we sample. Also, sampling can allow us more time to develop our data collection instrument, such as a questionnaire, and test it to make sure it's actually rigorous and reliable. It can also help us collect more detailed data from the cases we do collect data from. This is particularly the case in qualitative work. And finally, we have more time to try and reach our sample, so we have more time to reach those difficult to reach cases because of the way we're sampling rather than collecting data from the entire population. So we're going to look at two groups of sample selection procedures in overview in this video. We're going to look at probability or representative sampling and non-probability, also known as non-random sampling. Probability sampling is a whole set of techniques or procedures in which the chance, in other words, the probability of each case being selected from the target population, is known and is not zero. So that means we need to have some form of list of the entire population of the target population. Non-probability sampling is again a selection of sampling procedures in which the chance or probability of each case being selected is not known, and this is because we do not have a complete list of the target population. We're going to start by looking at probability sampling. This is done at random, similar to when you throw a dice. The first of these is simple or simple random sampling, and this is the way lottery numbers are drawn when the balls come out each week and you see whether you've won. The next is systematic random sampling, and here we select our sample at a regular basis. It's still at random because our starting point is selected at random using random numbers, but then we say select every 5th case in our sample, or we may select every 10th indeed. The third type is stratified random sampling, and here we divide our sample into strata or layers, and then once we have our layers, we select from within each layer using either simple random sampling or systematic random sampling. And finally, we have cluster sampling, otherwise known as random cluster sampling, and here we're looking at often samples which are clustered geographically. So we may be looking at incubator units for small firms, and there's lots of those all over the country, and we want to actually visit them to collect data perhaps by interview. So we use a cluster sampling to select those incubator units we're going to visit, and then we interview all the small firms within each of the incubator units we've first selected. Probability sampling requires a sampling frame, and the choice of which one of these procedures you choose involves judgment as to which will best help collect the data and therefore enable you to answer your question. It's commonly associated with statistical inference, and by this we mean you're trying to look for patterns which are statistically representative and saying, if I see this pattern in my sample, I will see it in the whole population. And because of this, it's very much associated with large samples, so large sample size. Non-probability sample is different because we don't have a sampling frame. And one of the most frequent used non-probability samples is quota sampling. This is where you have to collect data from a quota of people. So it may be that you've seen a national survey of industry which says there are so many in each of these industrial sectors of firms of different sizes, and you say, well, if there's 15% manufacturing firms of this size, then in my quota 15% of my quota will be manufacturing firms of the same size, and by that way you build up a sample which you hope will represent, not statistically, but will represent in terms of those proportions the population you're interested in. A purposive sampling is when you select your sample with a particular purpose. So you might be trying to get a sample which has extreme cases. The idea being that if something occurs in an extreme case, it's going to be very, very obvious. Alternatively, you might be trying to get a sample which is homogeneous, so very, very similar in each of the elements or cases. There are a large variety of different forms of purposive sampling, and we'll talk about these more in another YouTube video. Then we have volunteer sampling. This is where our sample either self-select, or alternatively we use a snowball where we find the first person in our sample and then ask them to find the next person, and so on. So it's like a snowball and it grows. And finally we have what is known as haphazard sampling, and this is basically where you take whatever sample is most convenient, and it's very rare that haphazard or convenient sampling is the best way to select your sample. Non-probability sampling does not use a sampling frame, and the choice of procedures involves your subjective judgment to help answer the research question in the best possible way. So in other words, you're thinking, how can I best get a hold of the data that will enable me to answer my research question? It's commonly associated with gaining insights and understanding, so in-depth work. It's also associated with using online questionnaires when there's no sampling frame, in particular with quota sampling when we use panel data or panels to actually provide our data. In terms of reading, I've pulled out 3 different books here. The Latpat et al. Book, Advanced Sampling Methods, is very much on probability sampling. Michael Quinn Patton's book, Qualitative Research and Evaluation Methods, is very much focused on non-probability sampling. And finally, my own book with Phil and Adrian in Chapter 7 covers both forms of sampling. Please don't forget to look at the other videos on my YouTube channel, and if possible, please do subscribe. Thank you.